Welcome to FYI, the For-Your Innovation podcast. This show offers an intellectual discussion on technologically enabled disruption, because investing in innovation starts with understanding it. To learn more, visit arc-invest.com.
ARK Invest is a registered investment advisor focused on investing in disruptive innovation. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. It does not constitute, either explicitly or implicitly, any provision of services or products by ARK. All statements made regarding companies or securities are strictly beliefs and points of view held by ARK or podcast guests, and are not endorsements or recommendations by ARK to buy, sell, or hold any security. Clients of ARK Investment Management may maintain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
Hello, and welcome to FYI, the For Your Innovation podcast. We have an exciting show for you today. With me, I have Lorenzo Valente, and we're going to be interviewing Jesse Pollak, who built out Base for Coinbase, the level 2 smart contracting platform on top of Coinbase. Did I even describe that right, Lorenzo? Lorenzo covers smart contracts and DeFi and kind of like all these level 2s for us. So Lorenzo, was that even the right way to describe that?
Yeah, probably call it layer 2. But yeah, Base is a project launched by Coinbase a bit less than a year ago. And they are launching their own layer 2 on top of Ethereum using the Optimism SDK, which is a developer toolkit, one of the most famous ones right now on Ethereum. So yeah.
Okay, so let me lay out kind of how I think about smart contracts, and you can tell me how I'm wrong or how I should add kind of flavor and nuance. So imagine one, like, what do smart contracts do? Okay, a smart contract is a way for some kind of financial instrument to be auto-executable without having to trust a third party to transfer the money from one person to another. So the way I think about this is, if I am a dentist in Florida and I have some kind of risk to reimbursement rates for kind of like the procedures I do, I'm a small dentist, so I'm just exposed to that risk. There's nothing I can do about it. Conceptually, I could go to Morgan Stanley and I could say, I need you to help me allay this risk I have. And Morgan Stanley would have a structured notes guy that would be like, oh, sure, we'll create this customs contract for you and we'll sell it to you and it'll allay that risk for you. But the problem is I'm a small dentist, so I can't afford the lawyering time and the structured notes sales guy at Morgan Stanley. But the reason I'd have to go to Morgan Stanley is if I go to the person around the corner and I say, hey, can you help allay those risks? If the risks turn out to come true and I'm supposed to get paid out, how do I know that guy's going to pay me? So what Ethereum and other smart contracting platforms do is they allow you to basically encode those risks in code that auto-execute without having to trust anybody in the back end. Now, does that capture what and why we have smart contracts?
Yeah, totally. I mean, if I had to put it a bit more simply, I would say, yeah, they're programs, automated programs that are stored in a ledger and then you can compute without the need of any third party or any other centralized company. So yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so the way we think about kind of like the overall market for smart contracts over time is that if you look at the entire stack of financial assets in the economy, intermediaries, including banks and exchanges and the Morgan Stanley structured products desk, they extract some amount out of the economy to pay for their costs and then to make sure all these risk transformations occur. So that could be, I am borrowing money from a bank. Well, they're holding deposits in custody, and then they are taking net interest margin and handing me that money in a loan that hopefully I'm paying back. Across the entire economy, banks take out a little more than 3%. Actually, I think in the most recent year, it's like 3.8% of the financial assets in the economy for their revenue. And the way we think that smart contracting protocols can develop is as assets are tokenized and you take out all of that expensive back-end infrastructure, you take out kind of the need to have Morgan Stanley's balance sheet, you take out, all of the lawyers doing kind of duplicated contracts over and over again, you take out the structured product sales guy, that drag on the economy can compress down to 1%. And that 1% goes to the underlying security models for the smart contracting protocols and applications that live on top of that. So there's, we think, roughly $2 quadrillion in financial assets that will be in the economy by 2030. And if you kind of attach the adoption rate of traditional internet to kind of smart contracts as we currently understand that they're penetrated into this market opportunity, the traditional internet up until still in the dial-up days, we get to, it's around a 5% penetration level by 2030. Net, that distills down to revenue accruing to smart contracting platforms. If I pay to own an Ethereum or another smart contracting platform based upon the revenue yield it generates to me, then I would conclude that smart contracts as a whole category, those protocols, including the application layer on top, would be worth around $5 trillion in 2030. So that's kind of how I think about the market. Do you think I miscategorized or anything? Or what do you think I should think about there as to why it would go faster or slower?
No, I think that's that's a good overview and a good framework, I think, to think about smart contracts.
So why do we need an Ethereum on the back end? And how is this stuff ultimately secured?
Ethereum in particular, and every POS blockchain, they're secured by a set of validators. And so these validators, to be able to participate in this network and be able to secure, compute, and verify the transactions, they need to put as collateral some of the native token from the network. In this case would be Ethereum. And so they are incentivized and economically aligned with the network to basically act rationally and be able to compute and verify the transaction in a non-malicious way. And so on the user side, when you pay for the gas fee, which is your transaction or the execution of a smart contract, you're basically paying this set of validators to be able to store the smart contract, run it, compute it, and be able to make a margin off of that also. So, yeah.
Right. So basically, a holder of Ethereum can put their Ethereum at risk, saying, I'm putting it at risk, and then using that money at risk to say, and I'm betting that these transactions are valid, transactions that should go through. And it's not actually a hard operation to validate a transaction. But if you do it wrong, like as in you maybe are colluding with somebody to try to fraudulently execute a transaction, then your amount that you're putting at risk is subject to forfeiture, basically, or slashing, as it's called, right?
Yeah, you'll be slashed. You'll be slashed. Yeah, exactly. And so the only thing that the validator really needs to do is follow the core protocol rules, and otherwise they're slashed if they're malicious or try to collude with other validators, and they will lose their stake basically, or a portion of their stake.
Hello, everybody. You may have noticed that we're wearing different clothing. That's because there was a slight editing / recording / my fault mishap in the intersection of this. So we're going to lead off here and then go straight into the interview with Jesse Pollak in a moment. Lorenzo, could you describe for me, like, why do we need a layer 2 for a smart contracting protocol at all?
Yeah, so layer 2 are basically one of the main frameworks to scale blockchains. So the main purpose of layer 2 is to be able to have more users and increase throughput of transactions on the blockchain. And so you can't do that like on the layer 1 on the base chain, because you would have to increase the node requirements and the hardware. And so layer 2s are a way basically to compute transaction off chain and increase the throughput of the application and the smart contract layer.
Okay, so and Coinbase's layer 2 is using it's the Optimism is that even right? Mechanism by which to do kind of these roll-ups to layer one. Can you explain what that is and if I even said it at all right?
No, yeah. So they're using optimistic rollups, and they're using the SDK, which is the developer toolkit of Optimism, which is the main company behind this technology. And so, yeah, within like layer twos, there are basically two frameworks to build them, either with zero knowledge rollups or optimistic rollups. And very, very simply, optimistic rollups, you basically you process transactions off chain on this layer two, and then you batch them and you post them on the layer one. And so it's called optimistic because you basically assume that transactions are correct, and that's why it is optimistic. And you have a 7-day window where you can basically approve if they are wrong, where you can basically submit a transaction, a proof, and dispute those transactions. On the other hand, you have ZK rollups, and ZK rollups post a ZK proof on the main chain, which verifies the correctness of the transaction. So you don't need to wait the 7-day window because you have the full proof of the correctness of the transactions. They're a bit more compute intensive, like the ZK rollups instead of optimistic, but they're faster because basically users can go back from the layer two to the layer one without waiting the 7-day period on ZK rollups. And Base is using the main framework called Optimistic, developed by the Optimism Labs company.
Right. So the general idea is I can approve a bunch of transactions off chain, and then I post them to the chain, assuming everybody's a good actor there. Then they'll go through, and then but there's a mechanism by which people can be like, you didn't have that money that you claimed to have when you spent, and they're incentivized to do so, and the user is disincentivized from doing that in some way. So it's kind of like a trust but verify mechanism to scale a blockchain.
Yeah, exactly. And so if you're able to prove that the transaction wasn't correct, you can roll back basically that batch within that 7-day period.
Got it. Okay. And so then can you please introduce Jesse Pollak to us, who we're about to talk to?
Yeah, so Jesse has worked at Coinbase for more than 5 or 6 years, I believe. And he was the one spearheading product, the Prime platform. And lately, I think the last 2 years, he has been the creator and main responsible for Base, which is this new project, this new layer 2 by Coinbase.
Great. Okay. Well, everybody enjoyed the conversation. It was a great interview. Jesse is really a kind of brilliant builder and lays out the case for what Base is and where it's going to go. So please enjoy. Welcome, Jesse Pollak. So good to have you on FYI, the For Your Innovation podcast. Jesse, you really have been at Coinbase since, I think, 2017, and built out a lot of the engineering team. And of course, most recently have developed Base, the layer 2 solution for Coinbase. Can you talk about one, like, what is Coinbase, which has a business model that's really contingent upon kind of people coming to it to do stuff, developing a layer 2 solution that seems like it cuts against that core business model?
Absolutely. And thanks for having me on. Super excited to be here. And like you said, I joined Coinbase in the beginning of 2017. Spent the first 5 years of my time at Coinbase leading all of our consumer products on the engineering side. So Coinbase, Coinbase Pro, Coinbase Wallet. If you used any of those products, me and my teams helped build them for about 5 years. And then in kind of early 2021, I decided I wanted to go back to being a founder. I took some time off. And I thought I was going to leave the company, but I actually came back really with this idea of, we've been seeing this kind of next generation of the internet start to emerge on Ethereum, but it's still very early. And Coinbase, for the most part, wasn't really participating actively in it. Like most of our activity was, speculation and trading. It was happening kind of in our custodial product that was predominantly, off chain, as we say it today. And I think, the company leadership and me had this vision of what would it look like if we found a path for Coinbase to be at the forefront of kind of figuring out how to build in this new way and bringing our business on chain, as we kind of call it today. And so That really just started as an intuition for all of us, where it's like, seems like something here, but we're not quite sure what. I think where it kind of led us after, a lot of wandering in the dark, a lot of trying and failing, was to Base. And the way we really think about Base is that we are building an open global economy. It's also a platform, kind of like an app store, where anyone can go and build apps. And this is going to be this like next generation of the internet that encourages all sorts of innovation and creativity, that increases economic freedom. And that Coinbase is going to play a really important role in kind of shepherding in that next era of the internet by being the front door for it. So, I think we see this less as kind of cannibalizing or replacing Coinbase's business, and more as transforming Coinbase's business to really be built on this new platform that is the essence of crypto. That is why we've all been working on this for a decade, and that can give Coinbase customers and Coinbase products, faster settlement times, cheaper transfers, more global accessibility, while still delivering, an incredibly trusted, easy to use experience. And so I think we really see this almost as like a technology upgrade, where we are upgrading the systems that have powered Coinbase. We are upgrading the systems that have powered our global economy in many cases for the last, hundreds of years. And we are upgrading them to a new global software defined and driven global economy that's built on chain, this next generation of the internet, and that's going to do a ton of good in the world.
Okay, so I buy that vision and wholeheartedly believe in it. I mean, we were talking about Lorenzo and I before you got on, kind of like how do we think about the value that should accrue to kind of the smart contracting space generally, and how ultimately it plays down centralized intermediaries clip 3 to 4% off of the global financial asset base per year to do what they do, and kind of smart contracts should be able to clip much less than that. We think around 1% into the protocols, and kind of like Coinbase. People argue to me that hey, Coinbase's business actually is really pretty simple, and even the Bitcoin ETFs cuts against it because Coinbase just facilitates people to buy the currencies and trade the currencies. How, like, practically does a customer move from being like a Coinbase customer to being somebody that's using Base? Like, what does that journey look like, and who is this person that's doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is, kind of one of the most common misconceptions about Coinbase today is like people look at Coinbase and they're like, oh, this is just a place where people go and like buy and sell Bitcoin. But if you look at Coinbase, if you look at the revenue mix, if you look at any part of Coinbase, what you'll see is over the last 5 years, we've started making these investments that really push crypto into this next utility era. And that, I'd say in a big part started with two what are now pretty foundational parts of our business that we started in 2017, 2018, which were Coinbase Wallet and USDC. With Coinbase Wallet really being the browser of the on-chain internet, kind of the front door, the gateway that lets people use these apps, transact in an open, permissionless way, in a non-custodial, fully trustless way. And USDC, we really think being the first scaled app on-chain that lots of people have been using in stablecoins. And so when we're looking at kind of like how are people making this transition from the historical, more speculative, more trading oriented world towards this more, utility driven on-chain future, I think those are really the entry points that we're seeing. One is we're seeing a ton of people start to save and pay and send USDC to their friends, to their family all around the world because they can earn with it. On Coinbase, you can earn, something like 5.25% interest. You can send it to anyone in the world for free globally with instant settlement times. So you're not waiting multiple days. You're not paying, tons of fees that you might pay if you're doing remittances typically. And it's always available, and it works on any app that supports crypto. It supports Base. And so I think that's kind of like one of the big things we're seeing people kind of enter into this utility area with. And then the other one is kind of once they get pilled with USDC or some other app, then they find their way into Coinbase Wallet. And what Coinbase Wallet offers them is it kind of offers them a little bit of everything. You can do payments in there with USDC. You can start to use these apps that are emerging, whether that's kind of restaurants that you're starting to eat at that are bringing on-chain loyalty or supporting creators or playing games. You can do that in Coinbase Wallet. Of course, you can save. You can collect NFTs, support your favorite creators, and it really becomes this entry point where we think it's going to expand into a lot more. You also have messaging in there. We're starting to see social apps emerge on chain with things like Farcaster. And I think all of that really has the opportunity to come together in this super app that our Brian's talked about, where we have this new next generation of the internet that's being built on chain, and someone needs to build the front door for it. And I think Coinbase has been iterating on that front door for the last 6 years with Coinbase Wallet, and we're really just getting to the point where we have cheap fees in the form of layer twos like Base. We have really great social experiences that are starting to emerge that give us a real sense of identity on chain, where you can actually build customized, integrated experiences through things like Farcaster. And then I think we're really just on the cusp of having the final big breakthrough, which will be around wallets. And the thing that I think is going to push us over the edge is Coinbase's new smart wallet that we're launching in a few weeks. That is really going to take what I think has been the largest thorn in the side for everyone who's been trying to get on chain, which is that every time you try and get yourself on chain or your friend on chain, there's so many paper cuts, whether it's security or usability or just peace of mind. It's like impossible. And with the smart wallet, we're just going to get rid of all the paper cuts. You're going to be able to get on chain in less than 10 seconds. You're not going to worry about security. You're not going to have to manage a seed phrase. You're not going to have to think about gas. You're going to be able to spend your balance, whether it's on Coinbase or a credit card or a debit card. And you're going to be able to access all of these apps with one account that just works everywhere. And that, we think, is really the final missing piece from an infrastructure perspective that will kind of click into place with that social graph, with those low fees, and with these burgeoning applications that are starting to emerge to make it so that for the first time, people really see, whoa, like the next generation of the internet's here. And it's better, it's faster, it's cheaper, it's more accessible. And it's something that we actually want to be a part of, which I think, I'm super excited about.
Yeah, that's amazing, Jesse. I wanted to ask you, you guys have launched Base, I think it was September last year, so it's been a bit less than a year. And after that, we've seen OKX basically announcing that they were going to use Polygon CDK to launch their own layer 2. And now I think Kraken is also looking for a partner. I'm curious to know, do you think long-term every crypto native company, whether it's an exchange, broker, will need a presence on chain, or at least like that's what the companies right now are feeling? What do you think about that?
I mean, I might go even further. I think long-term, every company is going to need a presence on chain, period. And some of them will create their own sovereign block space because they need that scale, because they want that kind of ecosystem opportunity. Some of them will come into kind of more general purpose economies like Base. But we really think about what's being built here as the next generation of the internet. We say on-chain is the next online. And what that means is that, like we saw in the early 2000s, where we saw kind of all of the enterprises in the world start to reckon with this reality, where in order to grow their business, in order to kind of keep reaching consumers where they were, they needed to move from the offline world that they'd been building for the last many decades or centuries into this new online world that was emerging really quickly. We think we're about to see that transformation again, where businesses are going to have to move from the online world that they've built their home on for the last 20 years into this on-chain world. Because on-chain, again, is going to be faster, cheaper, more globally accessible, and it's going to start to be the standard for how you build world-class applications that everyday people actually want to use. And so I think what we're seeing with Coinbase is that Coinbase is really leading the way. We kind of had to come out and do it first. We were the first crypto company to go public. That's always been the role that we've taken. But our hope is that in taking that role and in kind of striking out on this path, what we can then do is we can inspire and we can show everyone else what's possible. And I think with folks like OKX, with folks like Kraken, that's what we're seeing happen, right? They're seeing, wow, Coinbase is starting to transform its business. Coinbase is starting to be able to get so much leverage from building in this new on-chain way. What if we did the same? And I think what we'll see next is that it won't just be crypto companies who have that observation. It's going to be every form of company. And it will happen in waves, and it will kind of trickle down to the older folks as they kind of understand. That might take years or maybe even decades. But again, we really believe that the on-chain kind of platform and this on-chain world that we're building is the next generation of the internet. And we will see that transformation the same way we saw in the early 2000s.
Just to double click on that, I think it's very interesting. How did you guys think? I mean, you've touched on that, but the innovators dilemma. So obviously, I mean, we've seen Coinbase earnings. You guys crushed it, and now besides trading, there's also Coinbase Cloud, the staking business, the USDC. But initially, I mean, sure, Base is eating at business, like Coinbase's core business, which is trading. How do you think about that? And was it more like a long-term bet?
Yeah. Well, I think this is like, really credit to Brian Armstrong, CEO, founder of Coinbase. He's from the beginning said, like, in order for us to succeed and accomplish our mission of bringing the world on chain, of creating economic freedom globally, we need to keep innovating. And if you go back to 2016, he actually wrote this thing called the Secret Master Plan, where he kind of laid it all out. He was like, first, we're going to have the protocols, then we're going to build the exchanges, then we're going to build the consumer interfaces, and then we're going to have 1 million apps that bring the world on chain, that bring 1 billion people to actually use the crypto economy. And so I think he really set that long-term vision very early on in the business. But then I think one of the things that he's done really well is he's then gone and created space for us to kind of like take the shots on goal that are required to actually make that possible. Because even if you have the vision, he had it like 8 years ago, that doesn't mean that you can translate that to execution. But if you look at what's happened, if you look at things like USDC, if you look at Coinbase Wallet, if you look at Base, I think that we've actually followed through. Like now we have the protocols, we have, in Ethereum and Bitcoin, we have the exchange in Coinbase, our centralized exchange. We have the consumer interfaces in Coinbase Wallet. We have some of the initial apps in USDC and other things that we're building. And then we have a platform in Base that we think can actually enable those next 1 million applications to be built, which can bring those next 1 billion users on chain. And I think the way that he's done that is by kind of relentlessly creating space for entrepreneurs in the business. I mean, I was a founder. I joined as a founder. I thought I was going to last for 2 years and then go start another company. I ended up lasting 5 years building, kind of our consumer products because it was so exciting. But then I was like ready to leave, and I, took some time off. And then the exec team kind of said, "Hey, like, go on this vision quest to figure out what it looks like to bring the company on chain." And it was then like literally a year of trying and failing. We tried so many things and every single one of them didn't work. But through that, Brian and the rest of the exec team said, "We got you. Like, just keep going. Just keep trying. You're onto something. There's something here." And finally, after like 4 failures, we got to Base. And then once we had Base, the mindset was not like, okay, now we need to like have Brian get super hands-on and like control and dictate. It was like, keep going, Jesse. Like, tell us what you need. And for the last year and a half of building Base, coming up on 2 years, it's been like starting a company inside of another company. And I saw someone tweet about this. We were talking about it in another meeting where it's like, I think they said like some of the most magical stuff happens when you have founders inside of a business who end up getting all of the resources of a scaled business. And I think that's like exactly what's happening with Base right now. It's like, it's literally a startup. It started with me and a few people. We're still a really small team. But I'm giving a ton of leeway. The whole team's given a ton of leeway, and we're given a ton of resources to go and accomplish this mission that's incredibly ambitious. But we think that with the right support, with the right integration to Coinbase, can actually change the world. And so I mostly just feel grateful to Brian and to the Coinbase executive team for creating an environment where this is possible. Because I think the flip side of this and the default and what will happen to many companies is they will be met with this technology change, just like many companies were met with the online technology change, and they will not be able to adapt. They will go through the innovator's dilemma, and they will be dilemmaed. And they won't actually change their business in fundamental ways, and then they will be left behind. And the next generation of companies in these innovation cycles that we see will rise and replace them. And a small percentage of companies, I think, will be able to actually kind of cross that chasm and reinvent themselves with this new technology that's emerging.
Can you talk about 2 things? One, like, what's an example of one of the failures? Like, what did a failure look like? Was a failure kind of like what? Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure we know. So, like, what is a failure?
Yeah.
I have one in mind.
Well, I mean, I can talk about my journey, right? Like, of building Base. Like, we started in kind of like September of 2021. It was just me at the time. My first take, because I kind of had this idea, like, if I can figure out like how to bring Coinbase into this new like kind of world, there's gonna be something there. My first take was I wrote a long 6-page memo, kind of like Amazon style memo, where I was like, look, we're going to decentralize Coinbase, turn it into a DAO. All I need is $1 billion and 60 employees. And I brought that to our exec team. And our exec team was like, haha, like, cool, good idea, try again, right? But like for me, like this was it was my first stab. Like I was so excited about it, and they were like, Jesse, the intent's in the right place, the idea is wrong. Try again. And then I went back to the drawing board. I did one thing I can't talk about, but the next idea was we were like, okay, let's build a advertising protocol that can actually like start to help apps get distribution, because this is one of the problems we're seeing. They need to get distribution. So we built like kind of the beginnings of an advertising protocol. We went and talked to a bunch of customers. I kind of had this whole idea of a marketplace and everything. Again, we brought it into the team, and like we just didn't get excitement. Like I talked to internal teams, I talked to external teams, and people were like, this doesn't feel like it. Like we don't feel the energy. So then we were like, okay, maybe before we can do the advertising, we actually need a marketplace, like an app marketplace where we can like register apps and do that. And so we did the same thing. I went and talked to like literally tens or hundreds of potential protocols, customers, internal, same energy. We went down a layer of the stack. We're like, okay, maybe before we can have a marketplace, we actually need like an identity, an app identity. Did the same process, got the same outcome. In July or August of 2022, after those 3 tries, they were like, this isn't working in the current structure. Like you have 10 people, you don't need 10 people. They like shut down that team. They were like, go try again, Jesse, but like with one more person. And then it was me and like 2 other people. We ran this thing called On-Chain October, where we were like, what should we build? Like we have to find something to build. And we kind of reflected on all of our learnings from this. And we're like, what if we built L2? Like, what if the thing that we've been missing as we've been iterating on these different app layers is the platform that would actually let us build that next app that we were trying to build? Like, what if below the advertising protocol and the marketplace protocol and the identity protocol, there is literally just a platform that needs to be built first? And that was Base. And once we found it, I think all of us were like, this is it. Like we launched the first testnet internally at Coinbase, and like developers started building on it, and we were like, whoa, there's something here. And then we went and started talking to external folks, and they were like excited, and we were like, whoa. We launched the testnet. I was like, whoa. We launched the mainnet. So I think like really it was this kind of gradual incremental process of like trying ideas that looked or sounded or felt like what we were trying to get to, that we kind of had this mission and vision around, failing with them, and then taking the learnings and figuring out, okay, what are we actually trying to do here, and eventually getting to something that worked.
So before, at the testnet level, or it's kind of, can you lay out why, aside from Coinbase's distribution, people develop on Base relative to another L2? Like what is it that you've unlocked there that I mean, it's clearly working, like it's getting all kinds of traction, so what, and kind of a naive assumption would be like, well, of course, like you have Coinbase's front door, like leading people towards this thing, but there's more to it than that. So what is it that makes it work?
The thing that we've probably done best from a kind of like differentiation is lean into what I think Coinbase has done best historically, which is make Base the most trusted, easiest to use. That's it, right? Like when you hear like, why do people come to Coinbase? It's because it's the most trusted and easiest to use. And I think it's the same thing with Base. People trust that Base is going to be here for the next many decades. And they trust that it's going to be thoughtfully managed. It's going to be decentralized over time. We're going to deliver on all the promises that we're making. And then it's incredibly easy for developers to build on it. We've invested so many resources in tooling, in education, in infrastructure that makes it so people can build gasless applications. Coinbase is now building this whole developer platform where you can now go in, you get access to every single thing you need to build on chain. And we are just trying to onboard as many developers to get that easy to use experience, while also then on the consumer side, working with the Coinbase products and other kind of interfaces to make it so for the apps, once people actually want to use them, that's also incredibly easy to use as well. And so I'd say those they don't seem like huge differentiators, but when it comes to like the day-to-day choices that developers have to make, they weigh in a really, really heavy way, where when developers look at this, say, wow, we can trust that this is going to be here. We can trust that this is going to be a solid foundation for us to build on. And we know that it's going to be the easiest for us to build on and the easiest for every user to use our app if it's on Base. That's enough. And I think the thing that's kind of emerged out of that, it's hard to pin down where exactly this came from, is an incredible culture on Base that's like very unique. There is this energy on Base around builders and building the future and like being based, as people talk about it, where you now have like thousands and thousands and thousands of builders all around the world, whether they're developers or creators or people who are launching communities, who have this shared value set, who like, talk less, build more, who are like incredibly positive and collaborative, who like put the team in front of the individual. Like that culture, I think, has now created like a virality, a network effect. And it's being this thing that other people are opting into because they want to be a part of it and they want to contribute to making something that is bigger than just themselves, bigger than just their app. And so I think those are probably the three things that we've done incredibly well. We've been incredibly trusted. We've made it really easy to use. And then we've planted the seeds of a culture that I think has created an environment that people want to be a part of. And when you look at the results, Base launched about 9 months ago at the beginning of August. Today, Base has the largest DEX volume as L2s, the most exchange users, the most builders, far and away, the most daily users. We're not there on like assets on platform yet because we're only 9 months old, and a lot of these other things have been around for 3 years. But the rate at which Base has grown and now become the market leader as an L2, I think is indicative of the fact that we've really been able to actually differentiate on things that maybe other people wouldn't have thought would differentiate. Everyone else was so focused on like, we have to get the perfect technology. And we were like, the technology is important. We're going to do it. We're going to invest in it. We're going to make sure it's great. And the thing that actually matters is going to be trust. It's going to be ease of use. And it's going to be the culture that people can actually be a part of when they come to build with us.
Talking about technology, Jesse, I'm curious to know, once you guys decided that you were going to build a layer 2, we now have, in terms of infra and choices, app chains, custom layer 1s, roll apps. What were you optimizing for, and why did you end up with the Optimism SDK ultimately and partnering with them?
Yeah, and I think it's worth winding back to where we were, because we were making this decision in 2022, and back then, like there were no roll apps, there were no like SDK. Like we invented that with Optimism. Like that was really a thing that we said, whoa, Optimism has built this open source stack. What if we like help Optimism reimagine what they are? And at the time, Optimism was just this L2. And then I think through our collaboration, what we came to was this vision of a super chain where Optimism is like this chain of chains, where you have this open source stack that powers it all. And now if you look at the market, I think everyone else has followed. And like that is all of the meta if you look at all of the people who are kind of in similar competitive space to Optimism. Now, how we got there was a journey, unsurprisingly, and started again at the beginning of 2022 as we were starting to build these apps and starting to reckon with, even before we decided to build our own L2, what would it take for us to build an app on chain? And as we started building, the first thing that we realized was like, we can't build this app everywhere. Like if you build an app, it needs to live somewhere. And so that's a choice. You have to say, where are we going to put it? And maybe you can put it in multiple places eventually, but like you have to pick somewhere to start. And so at the beginning of 2022, we basically started a process of like deciding where we were going to build. And we first decided we wanted to build with EVM because that was kind of like the most widely used developer tooling. It was something that Coinbase had a lot of support for already. Then we decided we wanted to build on Ethereum because it was the largest economy, the most trust, really aligned to our brand. And then we decided we wanted to build at L2 because Ethereum couldn't support our scale. And so that was kind of this decision that we made in the beginning of 2022 as we were building the apps kind of in experiment mode. Once we decided we wanted to build on L2, we then spent about 6 months, like literally going and meeting with every L2 team, being like, do we want to build on your L2? Because at the time, we weren't thinking about building our own L2. We were just trying to decide where would we build these apps that we were building. And so I spent time with every L2 team really assessing like, what's the technology look like? How do they think about governance? Is this a platform that we can have surety in? What's the team like? Are they people we want to build with? Like, are they aligned to our vision, strategy? And I think as we went through that, we learned a ton. And then through that learning, we kind of realized, oh, maybe we should build an L2 too. Like maybe there's this opportunity for us to merge as our own L2. And I think we then took all of the reflections, took all the learnings from all those conversations and landed on Optimism as the people we wanted to work with. And the real key reasons that we decided to work with Optimism were fourfold. First, the technology. We had been playing with the OP stack. We found it to be super modular, powerful. It really gave us a pathway that we thought could be flexible to future changes. So we could start with optimistic prover. We could upgrade it to a ZK prover in the future. We could switch out other things that were kind of evolving as the technology improved. But it felt like the like most trusted and kind of best long-term technology strategy in terms of the way they were building it. The second thing that really aligned and worked for us was the licensing. Honestly, it was open source. It was fully MIT licensed. And what that meant is when we were doing the first testnet, we didn't even have a conversation with Optimism. We didn't go to them and be like, hey, like, do we have to do some deal or something like that? Like literally we shipped the first testnet and we knew that even, maybe we want to do a deal and we eventually did do a deal with them, but we had the surety that if we wanted to go our own way, we could, because it was MIT licensed. We could just take it our own way. So that was the second thing. The third thing was, I think when we thought about the kind of like strengths of Coinbase, we were really coming from a place of like centralization, of scale, of off-chain, which has so much, I think, power and influence and ability to make an impact. But in this new world that we were going into, we were trying to build an L2, like we were missing a bunch of things, and it felt like Optimism was very complementary to us. Right? They were like the most decentralized from a culture perspective. They were the furthest along in building real on-chain decentralized governance. They were really, really, really crypto native, deeply embedded in Ethereum culture. And so we kind of felt like, like name a more iconic duo, like the massive centralized scaled public company and the like massively decentralized crypto forward Optimism, like that combination would be incredibly like potent. And then the fourth thing was we, at the time, had actually been working with the Optimism team for about a year on this thing called 4844, which was an upgrade to Ethereum that back in 2022, at the beginning of 2022, when we decided we were going to build on Ethereum, before we even had a twinkle in our eye about building Base, we were like, we need to go scale Ethereum so when we're building and it's getting too much scale, we can actually have it be cheap enough. And so in the beginning of 2022, we started working with Optimism on 4844. That meant that our engineering teams had actually been collaborating together. We'd gotten a sense of their technical talent. We'd gotten a sense of their culture, how they like to work, how they thought. I'd spent a bunch of time with the team. I think that gave us the like surety where it was like, not only do we believe in the technology and the kind of licensing approach and the governance and kind of complementary, we also trust the people. And we've worked with them. We know they're great. Like, this is it. Let's go build.
And then clearly it's worked, at least so far. And you're attracting a lot of, like you say, users, developers, essentially, eventually assets. How does this directly reflects back into Coinbase's like business model at all? Other than like probably having like a good layer 2 that you can rely on helps to make that wallet experience seamless, right? And conceptually, if a lot of meme coins launch, then that probably like helps kind of Coinbase's business generally, just in terms of like more people are coming in the front door of Coinbase, ultimately getting downhill to this. Are those like the two like primary ways that it would kind of reflect back? Or are there other ways that I'm unaware of or overlooking?
The way we mostly think about this is if you think about Coinbase as kind of the front door to this new on-chain economy that's emerging, if there's nothing to do in the economy, that front door is not that valuable, right? Like, and today it's still pretty valuable, right? Like we're helping people trade and like on-ramp into the economy, and that's a good business. It's $3 billion a year or whatever. But I think like if there were 1,000 things for people to do and Coinbase was the place that everyone went to do all of those things, that would be more valuable. Because then everyone is depending on Coinbase and the interfaces that Coinbase is building to live their life day to day. And so I think really the bet with Base is that if we can build a platform that can support those thousands of apps, millions of apps to emerge, and then we can work really closely with Coinbase to make it so all of those apps work best on Coinbase, and that the default when people are going to use their app, whatever it is Coinbase, that's going to be incredibly lucrative. Because we're going to own, like Coinbase is going to own the eyeballs. And so Base will bring the supply of incredible things to do, and Coinbase will bring the demand of users to come and do them. And we'll be able to kind of like vertically integrate in a new decentralized open source business model that has never really been built before, but we think can be incredibly potent. And so I think we're starting to see early examples of that flywheel. So like USDC, I think is a great example of this. On Base, you can send USDC for free using Coinbase Wallet. We're seeing a ton of adoption with that. It's happening all around the world. And that, is not unique to Base. Like, you can also send USDC on other networks, but the ability for Coinbase and Base to work together to go run that go-to-market and go and make sure that people are getting wallets and sending payments and actually using this technology, I think is overlooked as valuable. And I think if you look across the rest of the ecosystem, you don't actually have people who are thinking in that same holistic way. Like, there's really almost no one else who is thinking across every aspect of the user experience, from the absolute tip of like, I have an app that can do the thing, down to like, there's a chain that can power that thing that developers actually want to use. And I think Coinbase is kind of bringing it all together with Base and Coinbase Wallet and USDC and all those pieces to actually make it work for customers. And I think if we can make it work for customers, it's going to work for Coinbase's business.
Yeah, we have a whole thesis around digital wallets that effectively, and that they will be economic value of a digital wallet gets kind of turbocharged if you have a huge diversity of assets that you are using to manage and access services, right? And then the power of defaults becomes super powerful. Like, whatever the default like mechanism is by which you borrow money, or just commanding kind of like those default slots becomes a really valuable economic position.
Exactly. And that's exactly right. And I think this is like, you guys talk about like all these different assets. Like, this is the Cambrian explosion that we're starting to see. I was just looking at data. In the last 3 months on Base, there have been more tokens created than the entire history of Ethereum. 3 months, 5 years. Now, a lot of people can say, oh, those tokens are just like spam, or it's meme coins or whatever. But like, what we're seeing happen is that when you drive down costs 1,000x, you increase innovation massively. And some of that innovation is going to be chaotic and, a little crazy. Of course, like, that's what innovation does, right? It creates chaos. But a lot of that innovation is going to be real and substantive. And so I think like our belief is that really just in the last 6 months, with this combination of low cost L2s, which just got much lower cost with 4844, plus social graphs emerging with things like Farcaster, plus better wallets with things like smart wallets, it's finally ready. And what that's going to lead to is like this summer, the end of this year, next year, this Cambrian explosion of real applications that people can do on chain. And Coinbase and Base are going to be at the absolute center of it. And our ability to think holistically about the user experience, about the developer experience, about the institutional experience, and build experiences that people just love doing and that they choose because they're better is going to differentiate.
Jesse, one question. I think right now, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys have more or less 500K users daily, more or less. With 4844, how many users do you think Base can support? I think like ultimately the bottleneck is DA, but yeah, I'm curious to get your opinion on that.
Yeah, so 4844 launched in March 13th, I think, or so. That drove down fees pretty significantly on Base, and it basically changed the economic and the bottleneck a little bit on Base. Before, the bottleneck was data availability, and it was very expensive, and so like people were paying a ton of fees for data availability on Ethereum. Basically, the L1 was charging us a ton of money, and then they built this special purpose carpool lane, blob space 4844, and that dropped out the fees that we were paying Ethereum very high, but then we started to run into kind of like contention demand on Base. And so there's this thing called the gas target, which is basically like how much gas, which is the unit of compute on Base, or like, that can map to like how many transactions can Base process per second. And when we did 4844, Base was at 2.5 million gas a second. And what we saw was like, once we dropped the DA cost down, we then had a lot more people who wanted to transact, and they started saturating our target, which meant that fees at the base level, like at L2, execution fees, started spiking way higher. And so that shifted where we needed to focus. And it put us on this journey, which I am now calling colloquially with our team 400x in 400 days, which is a goal for us to get from 2.5 million gas a second to 1,000 million gas a second, or 1 gigagas a second, over the next 400 days, sometime middle of next year. So in the 2 weeks after 4844, we increased our gas target from 2.5 million gas a second to 5. So that was our first 2x, only 200x more to go. We're actually in the process right now of working towards our next 2x, which we think will happen this quarter. And then we have a pathway to that final kind of like 100x over the next year or so. And so I think that we're going to see a little bit of a dance where it's like Base increases its gas target. People then kind of induce demand because you can have cheaper fees for a little while and new kind of apps emerge, and then it saturates and fees start getting higher, and then we increase our gas target. You see the same thing all the way up. And at this point, like, we've been running at target, like people have been using Base for the entire time. And so what that means to us is that we are actually like gas target supply constrained. And so once we increase it again, like, we will continue to be saturated. And so for me, this is really shifted some of the priority on our team, where now increasing gas target is the P0. Because if we can increase the gas target, we can bring in more transactions, we can bring in more use cases, and we can actually scale the number of people that are building and transacting on Base. And so I think with that 400x, you do the simple math, and it's like, let's say we're at about 500,000 today, and we've already done a 2x. That 400x over the next 18 months roughly would get us to about 100 million users that we could support on a daily basis. I think there's other optimizations that we could likely do in there to get more out of it. And that's maybe another 10x to get to 1 billion. And so I don't think it's crazy. And actually, I think it's very realistic that we can scale Base to the point where it can support billions of users. Now, they're not going to do everything on Base.
Can you help me understand the trade-off there? Like, if you increase throughput 400x, what is that? What sacrifice are you making to do that? Like, what is the? Why not do it tomorrow?
Absolutely. Why don't we just increase it 400x tomorrow?
Yeah.
Right. There are a few kind of limiters on the target, because the target is a number that we can set, but there's downstream impact that can kind of that makes us basically not want to increase it too dramatically. So the first one is that we need the computers, the nodes that run Base, to be able to run fast enough to process a block in 2 seconds, which is our block time. And so the sequencer, and not just a sequencer, but all of the other nodes that are running on the network, because there's thousands of nodes that other people are running on the network, and they all have to be catching up. And if they can't process blocks in that block window, the 2-second block window, then they'll start falling behind and they will never catch up, because there's always going to be new blocks. And so literally we have to optimize the EVM and the node software that we're running so it can run fast enough. And there's a couple ways of doing that. One is you make the software better. The other is you increase the hardware. And you just do super maxed out hardware. But when you start increasing the hardware, you limit who can run nodes. There's downstream consequences there. So optimizing that and figuring out what's the right balance of kind of increasing hardware without kind of over increasing hardware, that's the first thing that we're doing. A ton of focus is going in there. The second thing that is a constraint is something called state bloat, which is basically as you start running the chain faster and faster, you start building a bigger and bigger data set that you have to operate over. And that also has impact on how fast a node can run, who can actually run it, how much storage you actually have to do it. And so today on Ethereum, it's big state. Base isn't as big as that, but it's a concern for people. And so there's all this work that's happening with things like Verkle trees to basically minimize or remove the need to have ever expanding state and move towards a world called statelessness, where you can actually only have certain nodes that have to have all that state, but then everyone else can just kind of run these stateless nodes that operate, in a much more lightweight way. So I'd say those are really the primary things that we're contending with. But all of it is in order to keep this network healthy, we need to make sure that the network can actually run effectively. And as you increase the throughput, you limit the ability for the network to run healthily unless you've optimized the crap out of it, unless you've designed it and solved some of these hard technical research challenges that can do it. Oh, there's one more. The third one is, the third one is that we can increase our target, but if we don't have a place to put that data on L1, it doesn't matter. Right. And so we're still constrained right now by 4844. 4844 today has a target of 3 blobs, which, can do, we're not quite saturating today, but we're not far off from saturating. The full dank sharding vision is about, 1,000x where we are today. So that will give us a lot more capacity. And kind of as we've modeled it out, if we get to a gigagas, we think that will saturate about 20-25% of the full dank sharding vision as it is today, although it could scale further from there. And so those 3 constraints of literally running the nodes fast enough so that it can keep up with the kind of gas target, solving the state bloat problem with statelessness, and then continuing to expand data availability, all of those need to be solved, and they need to be solved in a really thoughtful way. And so that's why we're being super methodical about not too quickly increasing the gas target, because if we increase it too quickly, we'll run into one of those things and we'll cause a bunch of problems.
if I heard you correctly, you're going to increase throughput 400x over 400 days, and therefore you should also increase like active users by 400x over 400 days as well. Is that what you're targeting?
I mean, you can't I can't promise that, right? That would be a big one, but we're going to make sure there's enough space for those people. And I like from where I'm sitting, I think we are really seeing the emergence of apps that will bring hundreds of millions and then billions of people on chain. And so, I think I've said this a bunch, but I think that like one of the things that is very, very different about crypto than any other product industry over the last 20 years is that we haven't had real product growth in crypto. Like we've had speculative driven growth where you have these speculative spikes where like people get really excited about the price going up and they come in, but like you haven't seen like this product is growing 7% week over week forever. Right. And that's like, if you look at TikTok or you look at Facebook or you look at Twitter, like that's what those products saw, right? Like they started growing and they had the right mechanics and the right product and the right virality, and they just grew until they saturated the market. Same thing with Netflix. And I think the limiter on that is that we haven't actually had the infrastructure to enable people to build products that have that sort of consumer growth arc. And I think the thing that is changing is that we now have the right infrastructure. And so what's going to happen over the next year is we will move from a world where we only have speculation-driven growth that is very volatile and doesn't have that consistency to a world where we just start growing 7% week over week. And we just grow forever until the entire world is on chain. And I think that's hard for people both in and out of crypto to kind of reckon with because we've all been conditioned by 12 years of it not being that way. But all of the rules of product building and product growth that's existed pre-crypto suggest that it will be that way once the products actually get good enough. And that requires the infrastructure to get good enough. And I think we're actually there.
Yeah. I mean, to give you a sense of how we do it or how we underwrite smart contracting generally is we pattern match against the adoption curve of the internet pre-broadband. And I still feel like we're very much in smart contracts. We're still in the dial-up space. And conceptually, like, between wallet and base, like you're trying to build the broadband that then will allow us to like, and so we see like penetration rates of 5% by 2030, which leads us to an expectation of $5 trillion in smart contracting protocol value by 2030, and is where internet adoption was, at kind of towards the tail end of dial-up before broadband. But if you can bring 100 million users online, we're like a quarter of the way there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think this would I'm an optimist and I always think things happen faster than they do. Like that, I'll just like disclaim that everyone who's listening in, like Jesse's an optimist. But like, I do think that the environment is a little bit different than the internet adoption curve because this adoption curve, we already have internet connected devices that can support this transition globally distributed to billions of people. And so like with the internet, we actually literally had to get hardware into the hands of everyone. We don't have to do that this time. We just have to get the right software upgrades into the hands of everyone. And so I think that there's a good chance that the maybe this initial curve looks a lot like the initial adoption curve of the internet because we are doing this like very, very gradual infrastructure build. But once we hit the inflection point where the infrastructure is ready, it gets much, much steeper because then we can just flash to all of the phones everywhere in the world. Now you can transact with everyone globally and you can use these apps that are faster, better, cheaper than anything else you have on your device. And it's available for you right now. You don't need to wait for broadband to get installed. You don't need to wait to get a new phone. You can just get it from the app store. And I think that is very different. It's a very, very different environment than this. And I think it's going to happen a lot faster than people expect.
That's, I think, a great spot to leave it, actually, Jesse. So I really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the podcast. And Lorenzo and Jesse, it was a pleasure. And I look forward to 400x in 400 days, Jesse.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us on FYI, the For Your Innovation podcast. I thought that was a fascinating conversation with Jesse. We'll see if he can successfully scale throughput 400x on the base protocol while retaining its decentralization characteristics. And I think that he's right. There's a lot that's going to be built on top of smart contracting protocols. And in some ways, the entire consumer internet and financial experience could change as a result of these innovations. That's why we're interested and excited in them, and why we invest not only at the protocol level, but also in the underlying companies that are making this stuff happen and possible. Because there is so much room for displacement and disruption of the companies that are relying on the status quo to remain status quo. So again, thank you for listening to FYI, the For Your Innovation podcast. My name is Brett Winton. Please like, subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and leave comments so that we can know how to get better. Have a good day.
ARK believes that the information presented is accurate and was obtained from sources that ARK believes to be reliable. However, ARK does not guarantee the accuracy or completeness of any information, and such information may be subject to change without notice from ARK. Historical results are not indications of future results. Certain of the statements contained in this podcast may be statements of future expectations and other forward-looking statements that are based on ARK's current views and assumptions and involve known and unknown risks and uncertainties that could cause actual results, performance, or events to differ materially from those expressed or implied in such statements.